we can spend some 15 minutes more to get some questions from the participants, some live questions. I think you can also see, Keith, Agustin, some of those questions. In the meantime, I get some of them, which is quite, I will say, quite common over the last few weeks. It's about the possibility of resubmission for those companies who applied for the March cutoff, 20th of March. Will they allowed to resubmit for the 19th of May, the Green Deal cutoff, especially those companies who will invited to the interviews, because we have seen that the interviews this time will take place by remote probably, and will take place from 11 to 20 of May. On the other hand, the next cutoff is 19th of May. So for sure, can we say that those companies invited in Brussels, or better, invited to the interviews by remote, if they will not pass the interview, they will not be allowed to resubmit in May? I hope I was clear.
Yes, that would also be my understanding, Antonio, because I understand that our normal rules here are that we allow resubmissions. There's no constraints on resubmissions, but it needs to be at a time when there has been the feedback from the evaluation, so that the company can take account of that feedback. And as you say quite rightly, because the two call deadlines are quite close together, and because we have had to extend the interview period for the March cutoff, I don't think it will be possible for companies that are invited to the interviews in May to resubmit, because they will have not received the results of the March call in time. There is, of course, the October cutoff, which is an open cutoff, because we are aware that some of the, there is a thematic focus for the May cutoff, which will be relevant for many companies, but not necessarily all companies.
Thank you so much. I think it clarified. Keith, Agustin, I don't know if you can see some of the questions from the Q&A chat box. We can, if you agree, we can keep this Q&A session up to 12:30 if you have time to reply to some of those questions.
For me, it's fine, but it would be better if you read them out to me, because sometimes I cannot see them well. Tony. So you address you decide which questions, and certainly I try to reply and to.
Yeah, there are. I'll try also to summarize, because there are many questions about the equity process, the establishment of the EIC fund, the potential involvement of investors, private investors or co-investors. And also what is the state of play for those companies who have been selected for blended finance last October cutoff and in January. So basically, also, when do you plan to start the due diligence on the let's say equity part?
So let me take this one. Regarding the first cutoff, actually the due diligence has already started. The pre-due diligence and the due diligence. Because that all the companies from the first cutoff has been contacted by the EIC, either by advisory or by the front office, which are the experts doing the deals. And we have seen cases which were equally clear, quite straightforward, so no complexities in structuring. Others which were a bit more complex because of the complexity of the companies, but that is making progress. We have examined with the different companies the various aspects, and as I mentioned, we are already regarding some of them in the preparation of the structuring stage, which is going to facilitate afterwards the specific negotiation with the companies. Of course, some of these things cannot happen before the proper setup of the EIC fund, which is going to be, as I mentioned, in the next 3-4 weeks, something like this. From that moment, it can be very fast for some of the projects. It all depends, because let me give you one example. The case of a company with a very simple structure, in which we are entering alone as an investor to inject the equity that was for which the company was preselected. That, as I mentioned, it will be done most likely via a convertible instrument. So that can be very fast. Now, if we take now the case of a company which is a very complex structure in itself, with the presence of already of several investors with which it's necessary to talk, to negotiate, and even to ask them whether they would like to do follow-on investments in the company in which they are already. But at the same time, they come with other potential investors interested. So we need to, first of all, to see whether they are the ones ready to take that investment now at this stage. So that will require that the company, together with the EIB and those investors, try to see how it's going to be done. Or even the case that after the first contacts between the EIB and some of the VC funds or the investors which are already working with the EIB, as I've explained, there's some interest on the side of some potential investors, and the company is also interested. Of course, that opens a sort of negotiation in which we are going to participate to support the company, but there will be a negotiation which is going to take time. And let's assume that that negotiation that does not end into something which is positive. That means that we have to start afterwards again. So those cases will be more complex and certainly will require more time. Again, every case is different.
Thank you so much, Agustin. Still on this, thank you so much. Still on this point about also about the involvement of potential involvement of private investors or co-investors. Often, and also today, we got a question about the memorandum of understanding with European Commission, the EIC fund. So is there already any of these kind of agreements is available for those investors who would like to be part of this process? How to do that, when memorandum of understanding will be available?
Okay, so here, as I mentioned, again, we take one concrete example, a company which comes already with some investors, potential investors interested to invest potentially in the company. That is straightforward. So the contact with those potential investors takes place. Now, let's assume that there are no potential investors coming with the company already, because the company has already been in contact with them. What I mentioned is that at this stage, what we are going to do is, through the EIB, we are going to contact a number of investors with which the EIB is already working. But at the same time, there's one in our website. There's the possibility, because we have published the list of projects of companies which have been preselected during the first cutoff, and I would assume that the ones of the second cutoff are already there as well. And so this is indicated in the website with an email address in which is possible to any potential investor to say, listen, I am interested to either on this specific company or to on these two or three, and I would like to be able to see how I can get more information. Now, this is something that we are receiving already that information. For the time being, there's nothing being done because we are still at the stage of the first stages of the due diligence by the EIB. But the idea is that if those investors are not already, let's say, in the portfolio of the EIB, certainly there will be a procedure in which we need to certainly understand more about these investors. So it will be a sort of procedure for the due diligence of those investors. And once everything is done, including the memorandum of understanding that you've mentioned and other things, in that case, we will go and ask the company in question whether the company is interested to share information to that. Now, this is something that at this stage, it looks and it is very much tailor-made, but at some point it's going to be part of a very sophisticated system that we are setting in place, which is going to facilitate all this matchmaking, at least in terms of information. Of course, with one caveat always, that in the end, it will require that any sort of information that we are transmitting from a company to a potential investor interested, it will require the consent of the company. And through all the different stages. So the transmission of the first information through the starting a negotiation, and even in the end, whether or not the company accepts that investment is up to the company. But this is something that we are preparing in a way, and is going to work through a very well-designed online system that will facilitate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Agustin. Keith, if you agree, I can forward you some of the questions. I try to summarize. There are some, let's say, urgent questions about when the Commission, when do you plan to send out the evaluation summary report, so the communication about the 20th of March cutoff, especially also for those ones that will not be invited in Brussels. So this is the first question. The second one is about, is there a chance to postpone the cutoff, the Green Deal cutoff on 19th of May? Let's start with those questions, Keith, if you agree. Yeah.
Okay, no, absolutely fine. So we should be sending out very shortly. I know we're just in the completion phase of the remote evaluations. So for those companies who are not invited to the interview phase, the results should be being sent out I can't give a precise time, but in the next weeks, very soon. We will also be issuing the Seal of Excellence for those companies that have passed all the thresholds. For the next deadline, at the moment, we do not plan to change the date of the cutoff. This is because we want to be able to conduct the interviews before the summer break. And because we look very carefully at this, I've seen that there's various questions about whether we will change the scope of the May cutoff to include, for example, coronavirus. And the decision at the moment, but things can change, is that we are not changing the scope, in fact, or the deadline of the May cutoff. And we, of course, have the October cutoff as an open cutoff.
Thank you so much. I forward you another couple of questions. The first one is about, let's say, the definition of women-led companies. So do you need a female CEO or something similar role? Keith, I think we can say that watch out to this, let's say, requirement of women-led, which will be applied both for May and October cutoff, correct? So it's in parallel with the Green Deal in May, but there will be also this attention in October cutoff for women-led companies, correct?
That's correct. And we had a lot of discussion about what was the best way of doing this, because we know companies have different structures. But the easiest way to do this for a pilot phase was the CEO position. For companies that don't have a CEO position, we would ask for who has the position which has the same kind of executive authority, and to look at the gender of that person. And you're right, this will apply for the May call cutoff and also the October cutoff. It's important to say that this does not mean that we will not be inviting any of the companies that we would have normally invited. So all of the companies that we would have normally invited to the interview will be invited to the interview. What this means is that we may invite a number of additional companies to the interview who would not normally have been there, in order to give an extra opportunity to companies with a female CEO. But as I said earlier, then the juries will take the decision based on the criteria and without any gender criteria about which companies to fund.
Thank you so much. Very last question for the time being, but again, I remind that it will be possible to forward additional questions to the Commission through the specific form on the Access2EIC website and dedicated web page of this event. Keith, about Green Deal, I don't know if you can spend some additional words, especially on the impacts. We know there is a communication of the Commissioner von der Leyen of last December. This communication set up 8 sustainable macro objectives, which are more or less, the line to address also these kind of proposals. So I don't know if you want to add something else. And there is the very last question about, quite classic, I have to say, about technology readiness level. If there is a minimum TRL requirement to be eligible under the EIC Accelerator, which is basically TRL 6, but the floor is yours, Kit, for the last replies.
Okay, many thanks, Antonio. And I am looking, and I'll spend a bit of time after this looking at the questions that have come in. My apologies, I was having a bit of difficulty with the technology, but I'll do my best. On your two questions, the Green Deal, we are using for the Green Deal cutoff in May, the scope of the Green Deal and these 8 broad objectives that were set out in December. So although it is a thematic call, it has quite a broad focus. A company has to address at least one of those 8 different objectives. It may address several of them. And we do ask in the applications that this is not just a tick a box, but as part of the impacts, there has to be some quantification of the impact on the particular Green Deal objective, whether it's CO2 reductions or waste reduction or whatever the Green Deal is. Both on this and on women innovators, we've introduced in the FAQ document some specific questions to provide the clarity both on the Women CEO measure and the Green Deal measure. On the technology readiness level, something that we tweaked or made a minor adjustment in the work program is, rather than saying you have to be technology readiness level 6, we've allowed technology level 5 to 6 as the entry point for a application. And the reason for that was that we found in practice it's not always easy to define exactly what is TRL level 5 and what is TRL level 6. So we don't see that as a substantive change, but hopefully that makes it clearer for applicants. If they're unsure whether it's 5 or 6, then it's fine. We accept both 5 and 6.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think we can close this Q&A session for the Accelerator as well.